Well, John is a musician and a music therapist. What brought you into the music therapy?
Well, a couple of things, Patricia. First of all, I've had a love of music since I was a child. Loved to perform, loved to sing, and music has had a positive effect on my well-being and who I am in a matter of enjoyment. We all know, you get your music going or whatever it might be, and it's enjoyable, a performance of any type. I think something else that brought me into the music therapy field as I was a little older child is suffering from brain cancer as a kid.
Oh my.
And losing my vision. And at which point I realized I needed some other way to support myself and to express myself and to have some method of healing through the arts to express myself and get to a point of confidence and achievement in my life. And music was one way that I could still accomplish fabulous things in my life, whereas some of my friends were off going to play basketball and football, which I couldn't do any longer. Mm-hmm. So that was something that I could be very successful at, and then obviously meet my emotional needs as well, going through what I went through. And since I have a disability, obviously that has given me a joy to work with folks who have special needs as well, and mm-hmm. serve in that way with my gift of music. So.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to say that I have bipolar disorder, and frankly, if my parents and friends and I had known what the symptoms were for manic depression, I never would have lost my mind. That happened to be the worst thing that ever happened to me. And when I finally recovered, and also 85% of people who have a mental illness do recover. That percentage is much higher than people recovering from cancer. Mm-hmm. So I hope that you take that into your hearts. I became an activist when I discovered how people were being treated in the hospital system in New York State back in the very early 90s. And I moved to Milwaukee in 2004, and I started working on raising awareness on mental health. And you may have noticed buses running around Milwaukee County now that have a sign at the back end of them that says, "Put your money where your mind is. Mental illness is run in every family. Educate yourself." And there's an 800 number that you will see on the screen. So that said, let's get back to you, Brenda. And what are you doing for your son when he is going to come out in September, did you say?
Yes, and he'll be released in September. And I'm glad that you disclosed that you have a bipolar diagnosis, because I think once we go out there to advocate, we have to have people like yourself willing to say that this is a diagnosis, just like if I were to have cancer, breast cancer, MS, or whatever. Absolutely. That we need to disclose that, but there is a lot of people that's afraid to disclose that they have a mental illness because of the stigma and because of the way that people do treat people with a mental health diagnosis. And even when I started the ASK program, because I realized within the African American community that mental illness parallel to the white community is the same. But in the African American community, there's much more disparity, there's much more discrimination, there's lack of health insurance. Only 2% of psychiatrists in the nation are African American. There's cultural biases. There is the stigma itself that we place on ourselves, as well as what other people place on us, as well as the misdiagnosis of African American males. There is one doctor that I talked to quite a bit, and that's Dr. Michael Bale. He's a black psychiatrist. And he talked about that African-American males are diagnosed with paranoia schizophrenia instead of post-traumatic stress syndrome or some other disorders. So after I talked to him and I just realized all the disparities there, that I knew that my son would have to have someone to advocate on his behalf. And what I'm trying to do with the ASK program, and what NAMI does, and let me just backtrack a little bit, National Alliance on Mental Illness, is that NAMI was developed in 1979 by a group of moms that was pretty much tired of people blaming them for their kids' illnesses. And so what they decided to do is advocate, and we do research, and we do educational programs within the NAMI realm, and they felt that they had to do that because, and I always go back to the stigma. So with that in mind, is that with the ASK program, what I do is I go out and I do educate, and I talk about signs and symptoms, and I kind of put my family on Front Street saying that this is what we're dealing with, we look just like you. My son is not an animal. You know, he's a functioning human being, and he should be treated as such, just like my sister as well. But with that, just trying to advocate and just have him to have some type of quality of life when he comes home. You know, I says that there's 4 things that people will hold against him, is that when he's released, he's a male, he's a black male, he's a felon now, and now he has a mental disorder. So with that in mind, is that I have to go out and pretty much advocate on his behalf so he can have some type of quality of life, so he does not go back into the prison system. And I guess Willie can talk about that and attest to that, that there's a lot of people in jail with mental health needs. So we need to advocate for treatment instead of incarceration at the same time.
Yes, we do. And the community has an investment in this, because you have politicians and some law enforcement individuals will think that we can lock up the problem forever. Well, that doesn't work, because these individuals, they go into the system and they come out again. Now, there needs to be more work on the front end, like I said, disclosure, and to get the stigma of, you know, the embarrassment off of these illnesses and off of these individuals, because sometimes when we sentence individuals to jail, they lose their humanity to some of us. They feel that they can be, society feels that they are less than human beings, they are less than the regular citizens. But those are our citizens, those are our neighbors, those are our friends, those are relatives that are in these jails and prisons. And even though incarceration is necessary, we must make sure that it becomes the corrections that it's designed to do, which means that there needs to be treatment and therapy within these institutions, and there need to be follow-up once they've left these institutions. That will help with the recidivism, because if I send an individual who has a mental illness, who has a need for medication, back out into the community without any resources and without any support, this individual, and as you mentioned before, will self-medicate and will basically wind up in the criminal system again, and again we have this circle of recidivism and back and forth. These are our citizens, and we need to make sure that they have been treated, that they have been being diagnosed, and that they become functional members of our community again, because none of these people are going away for life. So we need to learn how to live with them in our community, and actually, and like Brenda just said, remove the stigma from some of these illnesses and from some of these activities, and start dealing with them from a humanistic basis.
Well, thank you, Willie. And as I said before, mental illnesses run in every family. And I was self-medicating before I did lose my mind and had a full-blown manic episode. And I was drinking too much. I would have been a full-blown alcoholic had I not needed lithium, which curtailed my drinking to a maximum of 2 drinks a day. But what triggered my first psychotic break was the fact that both my parents got cancer and they started to die. And because I was copy supervisor of Helene Curtis, which is down in Chicago, I had no creative energy left over to paint for myself. And so I had no way to release my overwhelming emotions. But unfortunately, in 2001, my sister was diagnosed with end-stage cancer, and I remained healthy because I painted my way through it. I was able to release my fear. I was able to release the agony of watching her disappear right in front of me. And then after I moved here to Milwaukee, my brother dropped dead. And the painting that you see in front of this table brought me out of the shock of losing him and helped me to deal with the grief. And that is why that painting I call Out of Nowhere, because things can happen to you out of nowhere. And that is the painting that is also on the mental health awareness bus campaign.